A top-hatted creeper hisses ceremonially and drops a lit fuse into a pile of redstone pistons. Welcome to a world where coal, steam, and TNT are the raw materials of progress, and every invention either whistles or detonates with pomp. The skyline is a chorus of campfire smoke and glowing redstone trails as miners in goggles push minecarts that chime like factory clocks. Meet Professor H. Gearbrick, a blocky visionary whose monocle fogs whenever steam pressure reaches gossip levels. He stands on a wooden platform above a catwalk of pistons and rails, and gestures at a glass cylinder where a miniature steam engine puffs politely like a distracted llama. Every click of his brass boots sends a ripple through nearby redstone, turning on strings of lanterns that blink as if remembering a childhood battery. Below, workers with soot-streaked cheeks haul coal blocks, their footsteps falling in perfect piston time, a percussion section of labor. This is the first spark of the industrial age, rebooted in cubes. The steam engines hum, the rails creak, and the town's barometer is a scoreboard of who built the loudest boiler. Professor Gearbrick believes that progress is measured in crankshafts and comedic timing. His latest project is the Great Steam Concatenator, a row of piston-driven looms that weave metal plates into clockwork laughter. He flips a lever, redstone snakes awake, and a small chorus of boilers begin to sing a hymn of expanding economies. But in this world, every elegant invention has a mischievous twin. Where the concatenator completes a row, a neighboring contraption specializes in dramatic combustions, timed to celebratory sheet music. Down the street, a baker named Mabel polishes her coal-fired oven. Until it reflects the moon, she insists that adding a pinch of TNT to her sourdough gives it character. A little boom wakes the yeast, she says. Neighbors shrug because in this economy, flavor is risk. On the river, a flotilla of barges tows a coalpile the size of a village. Paddle wheels made of trapdoors beat like hearts, and occasionally launch, a celebratory coal spark into the sky. Children in goggles chase the sparks, collapsing into piles of wool while inventing smoky games whose rules change with the next explosion. Yet not everything is whimsical. Mining is a grave, precise science here, and the tunnels are cathedrals of labor, echoing with pickaxes and slow, thoughtful sighs. Enter Mina Colwright, a forewoman with a copper helmet, a stubborn jaw, and the habit of humming steam shanties that make the tunnels feel like mechanical whales. She oversees a mosaic of chiseled stone faces and map-like veins of coal, each seam annotated with chalk and tiny redstone torches like somber paging lights. When a seam gives, Mina claps, an ancient miner's signal, and the miners respond by synchronizing their picks so the collapse sounds absurdly like an orchestra tuning up. At the factory's edge, a redstone railway connects to the town square where the mayor, a squat iron golem with a poem tattooed on his chest plate, presides over ribbon cuttings performed with shearer shears and an alarming number of fireworks. He announces new machines with the gravitas of a royal herald and the timing of someone who has learned to love chaos. The first steam-powered locomotive is christened with a top hat and a tiny cane it toots politely, steam condensing into blocky flowers. The train's whistle, however, has been engineered by an apprentice who favors melodrama instead of a simple toot. It performs an operatic arpeggio and accidentally detonates a decorative stack of TNT set for confetti. Confetti is mostly coal, and the crowd applauds because here, spectacle is also resource efficiency. Not all inventions are immediately popular. The automated whistler, a device designed to whistle so workers would never forget break time, was recalled after it refused to stop and turned the town into a chorus forever at halftime. The townsfolk have a pragmatic optimism. They patch, improvise, and sometimes tape a piston. Yet beneath the humor there is a feverish curiosity. Engineers sketch blueprints on parchment and on dirt, trading diagrams like wizards trade spells. At midnight, students of Redstone and fugitive physics huddle by a lamp where someone has drawn a schematic for a steam-driven automaton that can, theoretically, fold laundry, or at least sort socks by color and explosion tolerance. Noticing an embroidered sock labeled left is suddenly trendy. The narrative of progress here moves in sketched sequences: test, adjust, misfire, cheer, and repeat with pomp. We follow Gearbrick on one such test day: a pulley, a cart, and a novel idea to replace human loaders with a team of clockwork goats. He winds the main key. The goats spring to life, bleeding in a synthesized melody, and begin hauling coal with comic determination. At first, it works beautifully. Efficiency ticks up, and a crowd gathers, betting on whether the goats will outwork old Tilda from Assembly Row. Then a stray firework sparks the governor valve. With a theatrical cough, one goat tips, creating a Rube Goldberg cascade of falling crates, redstone triggers, and a polite detonation that launches the entire goat brigade into a fountain of coal. The crowd laughs, Mina sighs, and Gearbrick dusts coal from his monocle with the solemnity of a man who understands that every overturned experiment is a lesson annotated by smoke. He smiles, though, because he knows the story isn't failure. It's the first draft of industry, full of punctuation marks that explode. As dusk falls, chimneys become constellation lines, and the town glows like a circuit board debating poetry. Mabel hands Gearbrick a loaf slightly singed on one corner and says, "Better," with a hiss. He takes a bite, thinks of blueprints, and watches the town settle into its nightly rhythm of coaling, ticking, and the occasional celebratory boom. The creeper mayor taps his top hat, and a band of redstone fiddlers plays the anthem while someone releases lanterns made of glass and old compass needles. But in the quiet between whistles, there is a promise. The tinkering will continue, and each puff of steam is a punctuation in a sentence still being written. Gearbrick stands with Mina and Mabel on the platform, watching rails vanish into fog. He taps his chin and says, softly, "Tomorrow we automate the whistles." The words hang like cold dust, promising invention and mischief in equal measure. Night deepens. Lanterns dim, trains cough once more, and the top-hatted creeper disappears into an alley where, rumor has it, he keeps a ledger of every explosive ceremony the town has ever enjoyed. We leave them as the first chapter closes. A town of soot and triumphs, inventive misadventures, and the kind of ambition that builds both bridges and very elaborate patchwork safety nets. A single redstone spark leapt across cold stone, and the world remembered how to make noise. In the valley of blocky fog and river-smooth cobblestone, Mina Gearite crouched over a makeshift forge, goggles crooked, hair braided with copper wire. She was the kind of character built for thumbnails. Patchwork leather apron, one missing boot, a pickaxe that hummed when it wasn't being dramatic. Her hands smelled of coal and possibility. Around her, redstone dust lay like red chalk. A scarlet map tracing the first blush of an industry that should never have fit inside a sandbox. The first beat was sound. A chuff, a clack, a steam hiss that sounded like an angry ocelot. Mina's prototype engine. A squat assembly of iron blocks, furnace mouths, and piston lungs exhaled a loop of white cloud. Steam rose in cubic puffs, each one perfectly square, each one a pixelated sigh. Villagers stopped trading, pigs stopped oinking, and a nearby creeper glanced up with what might have been admiration before remembering its job-scene shift: the boiler. Mina fed coal into a hopper that clicked with mechanical fervor. The furnace glowed orange, the entire contraption vibrated like a chest full of bees. Redstone torches blinked in a nervous Morse code. The machine didn't just work, it demanded attention. Gears, crafted from iron, and the occasional enchanted gear from an NPC who barteringly called himself Barney the Barterer, turned. Chains rattled. Tiny minecarts, piloted by a single, very confused chicken wearing a miner's helmet, trundled back and forth delivering water buckets that were pumped and repumped until the concept of efficiency became a suggestion, rather than a law. Mina's voice narrated her own triumph in the way only an inventor in a dramatic documentary can. "We start with heat," she said, to nobody and to the camera if life had cameras, flicking a lever. Heat makes pressure. Pressure makes motion. Motion makes money. The line landed with the ridiculous sincerity of a villager handing over an emerald and asking for a blueprint. In the background, a distant smith rang a bell, and the sound scattered like pixelated confetti cut. The first engine powered a conveyor of anvils that belched out semi-finished tools with uncanny regularity. Hammers rolled off like sausages. Wrenches flew by with judicial impartiality. A factory assembly line sprouted overnight beside the river, and with it came the necessary chaos. An assembly of golems recruited as compliance officers. They stood rigid, their stone faces solemn. Yet one frequently tried to eat raw iron because someone told it that was what supervisors did in old country tales, a comedic twist. The first integration of redstone and steam met its nemesis in something as humdrum as slime. Slime blocks, liberated from the swamps by some ambitious miner, bounced into gears with anarchic glee. Engines coughed, pistons spat the sticky goo, and productivity metrics, which previously existed only in the imagination of a very optimistic villager, briefly plummeted. Mina, undeterred, waved a wrench like a conductor's baton and declared the world would adapt. Adapt it did. They invented a slime management wing, complete with signs that read "Please do not feed slime to machinery" in capital letters, and a baffling number of exclamation marks visual beat. Steam engines puffed, and in the puff of one exhale, a redstone signal carried through a network of rails and repeaters, lighting up lanterns along a newly minted industrial boulevard. Factories were blocky, functional, and fashionable. Smokestacks were upgraded with decorative banners, and pub tables outside workshops displayed cobwebbed schematics. The town took on the look of a living gear, streets turned into belts, every doorstep a tiny supply depot. Even the church bell transferred some of its worship to the clatter of production hymns, were occasionally replaced by the satisfying thunk of anvil on metal. Mina became less of an inventor and more of a spectacle. Children put on paper hats and followed her like loyal, wooden-planked allies. She held lecture demonstrations, how to time a piston and redstone logic for the slightly paranoid. Her explanations were half-knowing and wholly earnest. "A repeater is like a friend who always forgets what you're saying," she said once, tinkering. "You feed it a pulse and it promises to remember. Sometimes it lies." The audience laughed. A pig in a worker cap clapped once and then resumed chewing a scone. Another beat, another surprise. TNT wasn't banned in Mina's workshop, it was rehired. Carefully, legally, experimentally, TNT became an engineering tool rather than a weapon. Mines were cleared of stubborn bedrock with surgical explosions that sounded theatrical and felt surprisingly domestic. Cartographers recalibrated caves around results of controlled blasts, and the local geology developed a new patience. The mayor approved seismic codes with an official stamp that looked suspiciously like a creeper face. Here the story took a darker, humorous tilt. The first steam-powered locomotive, equal parts wonder and rolling kitchen, debuted to a crowd that expected fireworks and instead received the subtle terror of speed. Mina had welded together a carriage with windows that opened like trapdoors and a whistle that sounded alarmingly like a chorus of ocelots. At 5 blocks per second, it felt ultra-modern. It also promptly derailed when a flock of sheep, inscrutable and coiffed, walked onto the tracks because someone had misplaced the sheepfold. The train toppled into a stack of hay bales with the dignity of a felled oak. No one was seriously hurt. The locomotive's dignity was, however, in tatters. Pacing quickened. Workshops multiplied. Coal mines, once solitary and grim, became guilds of miners who wore matching helmets and traded jokes instead of ore. Redstone engineers formed clandestine societies in basements, sharing contraptions and recipes for efficient coffee brewed with lava and a filter made from cobwebs. A clandestine market appeared where enchanted pistons were sold under the table to the highest bidder. And the phrase automation is destiny was graffitied in redstone dust on a wall beside a kid's slide-short dialogue. Mind the gears, Mina warned a small assistant, a nervous llama who had been given a job for moral support. The llama blinked in the most officious way possible and nodded. The absurdity deepened when trade routes emerged. A barge pulled by a powered minecart plied the river, loaded with refined iron and bottles of contraband redstone-laced tea. At night, lamps powered by steam compressors turned the waterfront into a glittering runway for cargo. Merchants bargained in odd currencies, baked potatoes, enchanted books, and occasionally, a recipe that promised eternal furnace warmth. The economy, now lubricated with ingenuity and literally with oil, developed its own slang. Boiler up became a blessing. Don't blow a piston replaced older curses. Through it all, Mina kept tinkering, proving prototypes and failing exquisitely. Her failures were civic events. Townsfolk would gather with popcorn and watch a new steam-powered elevator either rise majestically or collapse into a pile of brass and good intentions. Each failure taught the village something new. Each success made their world suddenly louder and more efficient. The landscape shifted from pastoral squares to a patchwork of industrious plots, each humming with the possibility of invention or imminent misadventure. As night fell, steam and redstone lights stitched patterns across the valley. Shadows carved out the silhouettes of chimneys and cranes, and the moon, a perfect cubic orb, reflected on the water with industrial glamour. Mina stood on a rooftop, her silhouette outlined against a skyline of pistons and pulsing lamps, and for a moment she looked like a legend in a factory fable. She tightened a bolt with deliberate reverence and thought about what would come next. Somewhere below, a crate marked experimental TNT, handle mildly jostled, and a worker swore softly. The camera would pull back, the narrator's voice softening with ironic gravity. The first sparks had lit, the first engines had breathed, and a new rhythm had been composed, a clattering, hissing, absurd symphony. But steam is only the beginning. Pressure builds, ambition swells, and when industry grows teeth, so does expectation. Mina pocketed a scrap of blueprint folded like a secret and looked toward the horizon where rails disappeared into fog. The world had learned to move, and now movement would want more. The first spark fishtailed across a strip of obsidian like a lightning bolt with a smiley face, and the Industrial Revolution in Minecraft officially had its first hiccup. Ada Brickwright, a square-jawed engineer with coal-dusted hair and an eye for ridiculous inventions, leaned over a tabletop of redstone dust and sighed like a piston. The shed smelled of smoke, wet wood, and the faint perfume of TNT, an optimistic aroma here. She had promised a steam engine that ran on logs and logic, and the villagers outside had already started placing bets in emeralds. A quick cut shows the engine in miniature. Clay pistons, iron bars welded awkwardly with a hammer that looked suspiciously like a hoe, and a boiler made from a giant cauldron stitched with copper blocks. Steam hissed in pixelated curls. A tiny redstone lamp blinked nervously as if it had just read its first history book. Ada flipped a lever. The engine breathed and coughed and then, gloriously, shuddered into motion. The piston extended. A string of minecarts began to inch forward, clattering like a throat clearing. Next beat, the community gathered. Farmers in straw hats popped out from wheat fields. Two cowsharing apprentices argued with a librarian about proper gear ratios. And Mayor Cobbleton, a rotund block with a monocle, arrived on a platform carried by donkeys because he refused to trust crude machinery with his dignity. The camera, if the world had cameras, would pan across faces carved from stone and wool, all alternating between awe and the very human desire to meddle. Someone tossed a block of TNT into the crowd as a joke. Ada beat their hands away. "It's not the TNT you're after," she muttered. "It's timing scene change, the first practical problem of industrialization, power transfer, reared like a creeper behind the workshop. How do you funnel a steady, safe puff of steam into the greedy bellies of motors made from pistons and redstone repeaters? Ada's solution was a ridiculous hybrid. A chain of pressure plates, weighted minecarts acting as flywheels, and a cascading line of redstone torches alternately powered and unpowered like an indecisive choir. The idea looked elegant on paper and chaotic in execution. Sparks flew, a chicken ran through the gears, and became temporarily famous, a dissonant little twist. The steam responded to emotion. Whenever a villager clapped or made a melodramatic speech about progress, the boiler produced one theatrical plume of steam like a trumpet. The first time this happened, the whole assembly misinterpreted applause as a demand for full power. The pistons slapped a cobblestone wall with the theatricality of a soap opera actor. A brick fell off the wall and revealed a hidden tunnel with a sign. Previous inhabitants used TNT. Proceed with caution. Everyone laughed, briefly. Then they debated whether that previous civilization had better hat-scene break. Ada recruited a rowdy crew. A coal miner named Gus, a redstone tinkerer called Lynn, and an expert named Maris who had traded swashbuckling for scaffolding. They practiced synchronized starts like a marching band of oddly shaped tourists. Each start sequence had to be timed to redstone clock beats that sounded suspiciously like the clacking of a typewriter. A montage. Oil lamps lit, glass tubes hissed, and Gus painted his chest with soot in a move that was half tradition, half ridicule. At night, the steam engine's breath fogged the windows and turned the village into a living snow globe. Comic detail. The steam engine didn't scale well at first. When the team built a larger boiler, it expanded both their ambitions and the local rats. The boiler had a personality, scribbled with graffiti that read SWEAT, steam with excessive aesthetic turbulence, and it began demanding a ridiculous maintenance schedule involving poetry recitals. Lynn grudgingly agreed to read haikus each Tuesday because the boiler vibrated less afterward. The players adapted to ergonomics by inventing the ergonometer, a lever that adjusted according to how many villagers complained about back pain. The first industrial factory rose beside the river, a blocky cathedral of chimneys made from stacked furnaces, redstone conduits snaking like vines, and conveyor belts fashioned from stern-faced minecarts. The ambient sound was a chorus of clinks and soft explosions, as TNT was used carefully for excavation, each blast sending a rain of gravel confetti into the river. Fish fled in pixelated arcs. The factory's sign promised faster tools, now with slightly less risk. The villagers queued for new pickaxes, like customers for a bakery that occasionally threw in a free miner catastrophe, a twist of absurd governance. Mayor Cobbleton instituted industrial hours. Between 7 and 9 p.m., the town's redstone lamps dimmed to save energy, and villagers were encouraged to knit. The mayor believed knitted scarves improved mechanical integrity. He was certain this was true because he had once read a pamphlet tied to a chicken. The policy's biggest unforeseen effect was the rise of a knitting guild that specialized in safety scarves for pistons. They sold them at outrageous prices because, in a city of emergent capitalists, novelty is the first currency mid-scene. Competition arrived. A rival hamlet across the river built a steam-driven contraption that printed propaganda banners using an automated quill and ink system. Its slogans promised progress, slightly steamy. The two towns engaged in a passive-aggressive arms race of productivity, faster furnaces, more efficient conveyors, and a moral debate about whether to include a lot of gears labeled probably fine. Ada, pragmatic, suggested a cooperative approach, but pride is a stubborn block. Instead, they traded insults that were delivered via a network of redstone-powered pigeons. One pigeon dropped a note. "Your steam smells faintly of ambition." Ada pinned it to her wall scene break. Experiments with TNT evolved. TNT became a tool of precision when fused with timed redstone and tiny piston shutters. They developed the controlled burrow, a method to excavate mountains by choreographing explosive choreography that looked breathtakingly like synchronized swimming performed by lava. The first demonstration involved a pyramid of TNT, a chorus of smiling villagers, and a single miscounted tick. Instead of a neat cavity, the mountain hiccuped and produced an enormous, perfectly round crater that villagers declared a natural amphitheater. A troupe immediately claimed it for open-air performances of the Ore of Ages yet. With every innovation came unforeseen consequences. Steam engines required more coal miners dug deeper and found old redstone relics that hummed with strange patterns. The relics changed the rhythms of clocks and sometimes made the minecarts dance at night. Children began to ride the dancing carts for fun, screaming delightedly whenever the tracks performed a particularly jaunty jig. A small cult formed around these dancing minecarts. They wore goggles and called themselves the Rhythm Miners. Their hymn, a syncopated clack-clack that no one could think of without Smiling Ada's central struggle sharpened. Power, safety, and human ambition. She stood on a platform overlooking the factory floor, the air full of steam and the sweet smell of freshly smelted iron. She imagined a future where redstone and TNT served the common good rather than spectacle. But invention, she knew, always invited spectacle. A kid in the crowd sneezed at the exact wrong moment. A piston did a mock bow and launched a bouquet of redstone dust into the air. Laughter rolled like distant thunder. The part closes on a quiet, ironic note. In the glow of the workshop, Ada scribbled new plans. Model for an engine that would run cleaner, with fewer demands for haiku. She numbered the pages 1 and 2 and then paused, realizing she had miscounted and written 4 instead. The misnumbering felt prophetic, a small, human error pulling at the thread of progress. Outside, the town's chimneys puffed in the rhythm of a new age, and someone in the distance lit a celebratory TNT candle. The fuse sizzled like a question mark. Ada tucked her plans into her coat, looked at the crowd, and whispered, "We're not ready." Her voice was equal parts dread and delight, setting the stage for the next wave of engineering and mischief that would come like a wave of redstone and a gust of steam. At the edge of a coal-black cliff, steam spouted like a giant pixelated whale, and Professor Redstone's first piston thudded the beginning of an age. This was not Victorian soot, this was blocky, baffling progress stitched together with redstone dust, iron bars, and TNT fuses that smelled faintly of barbecue. He had invented a steam engine made from cauldrons, minecart boilers, and a suspiciously cheerful cow named Bess, whose role in the economy was, depending on who you asked, either pastoral or fundamentally explosive. The first sparks came like applause, redstone torches winked awake, pistons clacked, and a chorus of creepers in the distance practiced polite flinches. This is part 4, First Sparks and Steam Engines, the chapter where our cartoonishly serious industrialists decide that if wood smoke and hand chipping built a village, then a symphony of redstone, TNT, and hissing boilers could build an empire. Professor Redstone stood on a scaffolding of scaffolds. A hat of gears perched like a crow on his shoulder, and he surveyed a horizon dotted with smokestacks that looked worryingly like villagers' hats. Behind him, workshops hummed. Furnaces spat light, anvils pinged like tiny accidental fireworks, and apprentices in leather aprons argued about the best way to strap a minecart to a boiler without it becoming sentient. His rival, Lady Gearblock, arrived in a puff of piston smoke and an array of banners that made the sky look like a very organized parade. She carried a clipboard and a muffled TNT stick in her satchel for emergency innovation. Their first public demonstration was a locomotive built from obsidian rails, a piston heart, and the questionable ethics of hiring zombies to push during peak hours. A crowd assembled, goats, villagers, ill-tempered ocelots, all craning blocky necks to witness whether steam could be coaxed into productivity rather than explosive mischief. Professor Redstone flipped a lever theatrically, a hiss, a puff, and a geyser of pixel steam rose up like celebration confetti. The train coughed, the wheels clacked, and for a moment the world of dirt and grass believed in forward motion. Then someone forgot to secure Bess the cow to her cart. Bess, motivated by an inexplicable urge to chase a butterfly made of redstone dust, nosed the coal hatch open. Coal spilled like midnight pebbles. A spark kissed the pile. TNT nearby let out an offended beep. The resulting explosion was predictably spectacular and embarrassingly inefficient. It cleared an entire field of wheat, created a crater shaped like a confused, smiley face, and launched 2 villagers into a tree where they promptly started a knitting club. Sound design matters. The blast was a low, wooden boom followed by distant goat applause and the single most dramatic moo this biome had ever heard. The demonstration could have been a disaster. Instead, it was a marketing coup. Lady Gearblock sold commemorative TNT-shaped cookies, and Professor Redstone capitalized on the spectacle by unveiling the Steam and Schematic Patent Office, whose primary service was stamping very official across suspicious diagrams. In workshops the size of small towns, apprentices learned to read pressure gauges like fortune tellers, red palms they measured steam by the manner it tickled one's mustache, and judged redstone circuits by their musicality. Innovations tumbled out fast. Pistons that painted ceilings with soot, automated sheep shearers that developed a taste for opera, and conveyor belts that doubled as avant-garde art installations when draped with pumpkins. Amid all this aluminum-scented progress, a quieter experiment took place. The Steam Council began negotiating with the TNT Guild about regulated detonations. A document, later called the Good Blast Accord, that contained surprisingly neat stipulations like no explosions before breakfast and villager hats must be worn during test detonations. A highlight, a parade where TNT sticks were marched beneath glass coffins to demonstrate safe storage. One enthusiastic goat mistook them for baguettes and caused an incident involving startled apprentices, and an impromptu brass band humor was a public good. Cartoons painted on factory walls depicted the noble origins of industry. A miner, a plowman, and a very tired redstone torch who simply wanted a vacation. Yet under the chuckles, a question knotted the steam lines. Could this rush for harnessing energy be sustained without turning the world into one long, loud hazard? Professor Redstone stayed up late, soldering and scribbling in his lab of clockwork mice. He listened to the steady tick-thunk of the gauges and wondered if efficiency required elegance or merely louder explosions. Lady Gearblock suggested regulations. 1 detonation per policy cycle, she said, waving a ruler like a sword. The idea of governance made the TNT Guild very cross and also wealthy, because of course it did. They sold protective goggles with mustache nets. As the sun, rendered in oversized square pixels, dipped, furnaces flicked their tongues of flame, and the new factories glowed cobalt and orange like mechanical constellations. Children of the industrial block played on the rails, turning levers into swords, while older apprentices learned that invention often requires sweeping up someone else's soot. In one late-night scene, Professor Redstone and Lady Gearblock sat atop the tallest chimney, sharing a thermos of tea that steamed like a neighborly cloud. They argued about patents with the earnestness of philosophers, and the efficiency of accountants. They argued about whether Bess should receive a tiny medal for services rendered, and whether the Good Blast Accord would survive an afternoon of curiosity. Bess, unhelpful as ever, chewed on a schematic and blinked like a Baroque clock. Outside, a wind picked up, carrying the scent of hot iron and something oddly floral. Whether it was success or just a new manufacturing plant, no one could say. Down in the foundry of unexpected results, a machine politely labeled Prototype 9. Do not feed goblins hummed into life and began spitting out tiny brass gears, each engraved with the phrase, "a thoughtful thing to own." Some were used to fix clocks, others became necklace charms, and one very ambitious gear rolled away and started a union. This is the tension of our story. Extravagantly useful inventions and the small, absurd human hazards that dot their path. By the final beat of Part 4, the factories had learned to cough politely. Apprentices had mastered the delicate art of not tripping over rails, and the village began to hum with an industry that was equal parts genius and questionable taste. Yet beyond achievements and applause lay a horizon of unknowns: resources, governance,